Hello, everyone. I'm Robbie Swale, and this is the 12-Minute Method podcast. And in this podcast, I'm going to be investigating how we can beat procrastination, be more productive, and finally do those things we have been meaning to do. And in season 1, what that means is I'm going to be reflecting on a number of things that I mostly first wrote about together in one place in the About the Author section of the 12-Minute Method books, in book 1 in particular. These are things that over my life I have procrastinated on, thought I might not get done, and then finally done in the end. And in each episode, I'll spend up to 12 minutes reflecting on one of those things and sharing those reflections with you, hoping to identify patterns, things that you can use, ways that you can finally do the things that you've been meaning to do. Okay, everybody, here we are, episode 3. And in this episode, I'm going to talk about building a coaching business, or particularly how I built mine. So again, like I said last time, if you're feeling like you need to have the 12-minute method explained to you before we get any further, you feel like there's some stuff missing, you'll hear in this conversation, the previous ones, me kind of picking from the past of the podcast and also from the future of it. Feel free to dot around, but also feel free to go off, read about the 12-minute method on my website or in the books or somewhere else. So just before I get it, I set the timer and I get into thinking about how I built my coaching business, how I got that off the ground, how I did it, what were the important parts. I just listened back to episode 2 about the wisdom of David Gemmell, and there were a few things that stood out for me. I mean, one is I could have probably done another 12 minutes on that story about the way that resistance tied me in knots in it and since. And I just kept thinking about, I wanted to do a book of it. And I think that was a big part of holding me up. Like, I didn't know how to do a book. And it turned out I didn't really need to do a book. I just needed to make this website. And that was enough. And one day, maybe I'll get to making a Wisdom of David Gemmell book if I can get permission, but maybe not. And even if I don't, it was worth making the website. But I also used to do all these things that made it harder for me. They're like, now I would look back on and say they were resistance. I'll talk about that in a sec. But, I didn't want people to know that I remember thinking this, like I used to set the blog posts on the quotes on the website. So this is a website for those who haven't listened back to that episode. It's a website of quotes from my favorite fantasy novelist. I used to set these quotes up to post at and the tweets that went out at not round times, so it wouldn't look like I'd scheduled them in advance. It would look like it was real, as though that mattered in some way. And it's like there was all these kind of ways that I was making it harder for myself to make it sustainable. And gradually over time, with the wisdom of David Gemmell, as I got more into thinking about how we can get done the things we want to do, I started to see that they were ways for me to avoid getting this thing done, for me to try and hide from it. And I guess if I think back about that, the wisdom of David Gemmell and the insights from it, particularly if we think about the arc of the 12-minute method and what I've learned about getting things done. One is this was a time when I really used the ideas in the War of Art. So I really used that sense of what is resistance here and how do I get on with it and how do I let go of the resistance and ignore it. And I did that with the website bit. It's like, just get it up and I can tweak it later. But there were lots of ways that I really applied that. And resistance, I've heard Stephen Pressfield talk about it as, that's the parts of us that will die if we, that will disappear, will cease to be if we do the courageous thing that's calling us, that we want to do, trying to stay alive. And that were lots of things that if I became somebody who made the wisdom of David Gemmell, people would know that I love David Gemmell, and like I said last episode, I still don't really share it that much. I have got into that in the last couple of years, but I kept it kind of secret for a while. I'm kind of secret, not completely. But also I'd be somebody who could make things, and then that might have implications for other things. And we'll get to that later. So resistance and using it was one thing. And I talked about insight from the career change was using the things that we've learned, that we can learn about ourselves to get things done. The second piece is that you don't have to do it all at first. You don't have to have it all started out. You can just do it 1 week at a time. And what I thought when I first started posting the emails and the quotes on the website. So what would happen is I thought that I would type up all of them at once and then gradually send them out, all 1,000 David Gemmell quotes that I'd collected. In the end, what I thought was, I can send a weekly wisdom email every week and I can upload a quote every week so that I can then send it out. And then gradually, and then maybe at some point I'll sit down for a day and put loads more of them online. But I've never done that. It's been 7 years and the weekly wisdom is more than enough. And like I said last time, we're on 300 and something David Gemmell quotes up there now, 1 week at a time. Okay, so that's enough from about the wisdom of David Gemmell for now. But like I said, I just caught a load more things there that I hadn't talked about last time. I don't think that were a part of that story, full of rich learning for me when I think back. And now in this episode, I'm going to set my timer. Again, go back to episode 1 to hear more about timers. I'm going to set my timer and talk about building a coaching business and how I got that off the ground. I'm going to be talking more about getting it off the ground rather than keeping it going. But I think that's an important part of this. And remember, for me, this is all about, can I inspire you to get something off the ground, to just start it in some small way from this episode? So if you're a coach, there might be lots of practical things you can learn here, but mostly I'm going to be focusing on what are the things I did that got me out of my own way and got my coaching business going. So I talked about in episode 1, finding the coaching school and doing the training and taking those steps and getting out of my own way so that I could do it, so that the outcome I could say, well, look, if it's not a coaching business, then that's okay. Like the coaching training will help me wherever I end up. So that was really important in getting going. But it turned out coaching was the thing. You know, I kept going with these relatively little experiments, just kept moving in that direction. And 7 years on now since the coaching business started, Wisdom of David Gemmell about the same time, 7 years on, it's still going strong. And it feels like, I don't know if it'll be the thing forever, but it's been the thing for a long time now, longer than anything else in my professional life. So there are a few things that I remember from those early days. One is I was starting to become aware there were things I would have to learn, and I would have to put myself through some stuff to get to those places. So I'd never run my own business. And so I had this idea that the money conversation, I was reading some blogs. My brother had written some. He's Ewan Townhead at ewantownhead.com. You can find some of his money blogs. They were really important for me. And I had this idea, like, talking about money is going to be hard for me. I'm going to need to practice that. I've never sold stuff before, really. I've never sold myself before, certainly. So when Phil and Mike at the coaching school said, we're going to get practice clients now, we recommend you charge a nominal fee, I went for that. I decided to do it straight away to get practicing. And that, I guess, is when we get to the writing practice next time, which is where the 12-minute method really emerged. That was a big part of it. So I started practicing this thing that I didn't like, which is having conversations about money. I had them from the start, and that definitely helped because it meant I practiced people paying me for this thing from the very beginning of my coaching training, pretty much. So that was a key part of it. But even that was wrapped in resistance. So Phil gave us pretty much a template to share, but I can remember the fear. Like I say, you know, whenever might hear me say, I can remember the feeling of hovering over the post button, or I can remember, you know, not pressing it and then pressing it. It's often this post that I'm thinking about. Phil had, you know, given us a Phil Bolton, this is, you can find me interviewing him on the Coach's Journey podcast. He'd given us a template to post on Facebook, and I'd adapted it a little bit. It was ready to go, and the resistance was there. But I'd read The War of Art. I knew resistance would show up. More than that, I knew Stephen Pressfield's rule of thumb in The War of Art, which is the more resistance we feel, the more important the thing is to our soul's evolution. So it's like I could feel how scary it was to tell people I was doing this coaching training, to tell people I was setting off on this journey. And luckily, I knew that I had to do the thing anyway. And so I did. I posted it. And then I got the rush of what happens, the rush of courage of taking those actions. And, you know, Stephen Pressfield talks about it differently but I put something I wrote about, inspired by Stephen Pressfield, at the start of How to Start When You're Stuck, which is inspiration is always around us. It's when we make a start that we let inspiration in. And when I posted that, I could feel that. I got this rush. It's like, oh my word, I did it. I did this thing. I began, you know, and what I would say now is I began to change at that point. I began to become the person I am now, become the coach, because I told people about it. And then I got some feedback. I got some people liking it, some comments. Practice clients were created from that post. So I think about the next key moment. So I kept doing that throughout the training, but another key moment was I got some coaching from one woman called Holly Aston, and we were practicing coaching together. She was doing a different training, and in that coaching session, it emerged for me. It's like I could feel the tension in me. So getting coaching was a big part of how I got my coaching business going. But I could feel that. How can I put it? So I could feel in that coaching session like there was a lot of tension going on. And in the coaching session emerged, I need to create more space. for the coaching business. Doing it evenings and weekends was too much. It was conflict. I can't remember exactly what it was. And that's when I started to do that. And then I got kind of lucky. I don't know what I would have done otherwise, but one of my colleagues in the office job that I worked in left, and me and somebody else applied for that job on a job share. So I then did that for another year and a half. So I've been coaching for 6 months by this point. Another year, 15 months after that, I did this job part-time as a job share. And that was really good for me. I just wrote an article today as part of the 12-minute blog about cycles of an entrepreneur. And one of them, I've totally just lost my train of thought there. That's so funny. And I, normally when I'm doing a 12-minute writing, I just pause for this, but doing 12-minute podcast, I have to tell you that because otherwise it's really weird. I've completely lost what I was going to say then. I was going to say one of the cycles is the boom bust cycle. And it was really useful for me to have the boom bust going when I had some money coming in. So this is Liz Gilbert's idea. She says something like day jobs get a bad rap. Again, this is in Big Magic. So, and who are we to say that we should put all of our material needs, the need to pay rent and buy clothes and buy food and have fun with things that we need to pay money for, on our calling, on something so precious and potentially delicate as that. And it was so useful for me to not be doing that in those early stages because the pressure was still high. It was very important to me. There were lots of moments of resistance. There were some moments of like despair, really, is how I can remember them. But my material livelihood didn't totally rest on that. Although I did have some skin in the game, which is probably also a part of it. Like my salary from 3 days a week was not enough to pay for anything. I was poor by my standards at that point, by the standards of a person who lives in London. And that was difficult. So it's good to have skin in the game. But it's also good to not have all my material well-being resting on this thing that really mattered to me. That feels like an important thing as part of this. Again, it's detaching the outcome somewhat, a bit like I spoke about last time. What else happened? What else was important? So, then when I first got to I first had my first week of work, I didn't have any clients. It was terrifying. So there were two important things that happened at that point. So my practice clients that had paid me a little amount had all finished. So when I got to these 2 days a week that I created for my coaching business, I didn't have any work to do. I didn't have any clients. And there were two things that made a big difference at that point. So one is from Stephen Pressfield. He says, how do we beat resistance? We turn pro. What does that mean? We treat our calling, we treat this work that means so much to our hearts and souls exactly like we would treat any job. We show up at 9 a.m. We leave at 5 p.m. He has other things in there, like we take payment. We don't rest our whole sense of self on the work, although those, that is really hard, or I found it really hard not to rest my sense of self on that. But I had this idea, you turn up and you sit down, and then you stay sitting, and at the end of the day, you get up, but you stay working. At least you stay sitting for that time. In a way, once you're sitting down for 8 hours, give or take a lunch break, it's like you might as well do something. It's almost easier to do something if you're sitting in front of the computer at that point. So that was really important. It's like turn pro, have the time you sit down. Again, we'll get back to this with writing next time. Have the time you sit down, have the time you get up, work in that time. And that was just really important for me. And the second piece was, of course, what do you do in that time? And what was really one of the most important shifts for me, I've spoken about this elsewhere, was I was on a training course. So I'd got into the idea of learning about coaching training. And on one of these calls, this woman called Carolyn Freyer Jones had just created a shift for me. I'd asked a question of real scarcity. So we think about the art of possibility. I mentioned last time, it's the shift from scarcity to possibility. Real scarcity, which was something like, I really want to get this right with the people that I work with. What can I do that makes it more likely that they sign up to work with me? And she said, well, what about if instead you found a way to, she dictated to me and everyone else on the call one to me and then one to somebody else later in the call, 2 ways to invite people into a coaching conversation. Now, what was amazing about these is, and I've spoken about them elsewhere, you can find them on Coach's Journey podcast episodes and things like that, or email me or message me if you want me to send them to you. But they were key because they were repeatable things. I could basically repeat them to infinity, and they were action I could take that I could tell would help my business grow. And so then I had it within my control, right? So I had some things I could do on those days that felt valuable, and they were great things. So They were ways to coach people, either because I just thought they would be really exciting and inspiring people to coach, or because they might have networks that I could work with. And they just planted seeds for me. And those seeds did help fulfill the business. And I wrote about this in an article called How I Became a Full-Time Coach less than 2 years after starting my training. You can find that at robbieswale.com and thecoachesjourney.com and on LinkedIn, which ended up getting read, probably 10,000 times now, which is probably my most read article. And I told the story of how I'd done this in there. And so you can read more about that detail in there. But that move, really, creating that coaching business from scratch, those two things were so important. So it's sit down. Well, three things, I guess. Be aware of resistance. It's there. It's going to be there. Sit down. I'm kind of captioning them. Practice the things that are going to be awkward. Sit down and stay sitting. And be in a place where you can create. You can take action. You can take control of your life, of the thing that you're doing. Make success of it within your control. And I did some great things as part of that with support from coaches. So I got coaching throughout this period. That was a massive part of me building a successful coaching business. Joel, who we'll talk about more next time, he sent me some challenges about invitations. Again, it's practice these things that make me uncomfortable. Like, go out there, do the thing, and find that once you practice it. So one way to practice is like the wisdom of David Gemmell, do it once a week, one bit at a time. Another way is to set myself a challenge, right? Joel sent me an invitation challenge. Invite 30 people into coaching conversations in this month. That got me out of my own way. It got me out of my resistance. I did the same thing on a kind of game way with making proposals. So saying it costs X pounds to work with me for Y months. So what's cool about that is whether I have a client is outside of my control. I can make myself more likely to have a client, a bit more client prone, but I can't make somebody say yes. But much more within my control is I can say it costs X pounds to work with me for Y months. So again, that's a really cool thing to kind of measure my success based on. The outcome, not myself off the hook for the clients. Joel sets me a proposal challenge, make X pounds in proposals this month. Then whether I get the clients is off the hook, and I just have to concentrate on saying it costs X pounds to work with me for Y months. The good thing about that is, again, it got me through resistance because when I could get playful, I didn't have any time to waste making proposals that were only for, £30 like I had with my first clients. I had to raise those prices. So I was practicing raising my prices at that time. I practiced inviting people into my coaching conversations at other times. And getting into those practices, setting myself these challenges, we'll talk more about the challenges probably when we get to the podcast challenge in a later episode. They were really important ways of me. Oh, there goes the timer. Me getting out of my own way, me getting creative and asking for help in some ways as well. So a really whistle-stop tour through the first 2 years of my coaching business, hopefully picking out those key insights that might help you finally do the things you want to do. I'm off to probably go and pick up my daughter from work now. I'm going to do a tiny bit of trying to get this episode ready, not from work, from nursery now. I'm going to do a tiny bit of editing before I do that. There's so much I could say more about coaching business, but in a way, that's why I've got a separate part of my business at thecoachesjourney.com. There's a whole series of interviews there. There's a whole set of episodes of that podcast and articles that are about me and about my experience. So if you want more of what's in this episode, definitely go over there. I'll probably talk more about the coach's journey at some point in the future. But yeah, I hope there's been loads in this episode for you. I hope you can find even just one thing that might help you do the thing you want to do. And I look forward to having you back with me on episode 4 of the 12-Minute Method podcast. Okay, just a couple more things before you head out to whatever else you've got going on in the rest of your day. If you want to find out a bit more about me or sign up to my mailing list, you can do that at www.robbieswale.com. If you want to read the 12-Minute Method books, you can find out more about them on my website. You can find them on Amazon, and you can find them in lots of other bookshops and booksellers around the world. You might want to come and join the 12-Minute Method Facebook group. You can find that by searching for the 12-Minute Method on Facebook, or there's links on my website. And you can find some other people there who are interested in doing work that matters to them and finally doing the things that they want to do. You can find me on lots of social media platforms. I'm most active on LinkedIn, so you might want to find me there. And most of all, I'd love to hear from you, especially if something that I've made has inspired you to finally do something you've been meaning to do for a long time. Hearing those stories are some of the most meaningful things for me in my work. And so they help me keep going when I might want to give up. So I'd love to hear from you. But most of all, I'd love it if you did that thing that matters to you that you've been meaning to do.